The night was thick with silence in Kwame Adewale's mansion on the edge of Lagos. Chandeliers glowed dimly above polished marble floors, but the billionaire himself sat alone in his study, staring at a flickering candle on his desk. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man worth billions surrounded by golden lights, preferring the stubborn flame of wax. Kwame was only 36, yet he owned half the steel plants that fueled West Africa's construction boom. Newspapers called him the Iron Prince. Business magazines praised his ruthless intelligence, his ability to crush competitors before they even saw him coming. But lately every headline felt hollow. He had built an empire, yes, but had he built anything worth remembering? On his desk lay a folded newspaper. Its front page photo wasn't of him. It was of 3 factory workers covered in soot, faces streaked with tears. A caption screamed, 2 dead, 5 injured in factory blast, workers blame negligence. Kwame had read that article 10 times. The dead men were in his factory. The injured? His responsibility. And yet, he realized with a hollow pit in his stomach, he had never once stepped onto that factory floor as anything more than a guest in a tailored suit. He thought of his late father, a man who had started as a blacksmith in Ibadan. His father used to say, "If you don't feel the heat of the fire, you'll never know what the iron truly costs." That night, Kwame made a decision that would stun the world. He scribbled a letter on thick paper, sealed it in an envelope, and placed it in his drawer. It read, "If I do not return, let it be known that I went to walk among my people, not as their master but as their brother. For 7 days I will work as a laborer. If I die proving that no man's sweat is cheaper than mine." The next morning, Kwame disappeared from his mansion. His aides panicked, the press speculated, but nobody knew the truth. Dressed in worn jeans, scuffed boots, and a helmet too big for his head, the billionaire entered his own steel factory as a nameless worker. The clock struck 6 a.m. The factory siren wailed. A new life began. The factory smelled of fire, iron, and sweat. Machines roared like angry beasts, spitting sparks into the air. Workers, their clothes soaked in grime, moved like shadows across the floor. Among them was a man nobody recognized. Thin, tall, his hands too soft for the work, his eyes too sharp for a rookie. He carried a steel rod awkwardly, almost dropping it before catching himself. "Hey, new boy," one of the laborers shouted, laughing. "You sure you came to the right place? This isn't a playground." The others laughed, their voices echoing across the floor. Kwame lowered his head, forcing a sheepish smile. "Blend in. Don't talk too much." He had given the name Kojo, pretending to be a jobless drifter. The supervisor barely looked at him when he handed him gloves and barked, "Work or leave." The day stretched endlessly. Kwame's back ached from lifting steel sheets. His palms blistered within hours, the gloves too thin to protect him. Sweat soaked his shirt until it clung like a second skin. He tried to keep up, but his movements were clumsy. A man with a scar down his cheek shook his head and muttered, "City boy won't last a day." By lunch, Kwame sat alone under a corrugated roof, eating cold rice from a plastic bowl. The other workers ate in groups, joking, gossiping. He watched them, memorizing their faces. Some looked barely 20. Others had eyes heavy with decades of fatigue. When he tried to start a conversation with the man beside him, the man only said, "Eat fast. Break is short." By evening, Kwame's body screamed in pain. His arms trembled so badly, he could barely hold the last load of steel. The others mocked him again, laughing as he nearly stumbled. But something inside him burned. Not anger, not shame, but determination. He remembered his father's words. "If you don't feel the heat of the fire." When the siren finally rang to end the shift, Kwame collapsed onto the ground, breathing hard. The workers filed out, still laughing. Nobody cared about the new boy. Nobody knew that the billionaire they mocked had just survived his first day as a laborer. And nobody could guess what would happen next. The factory siren screamed again at 6 a.m., dragging the workers into another day of fire and noise. Kwame's body begged for rest. His shoulders throbbed, his palms were torn, and every breath reminded him of yesterday's punishment. Still, he pulled on his boots and forced himself to blend back into the crowd. The factory floor was no friendlier today. Sparks rained from the welding stations, machines clanged, and the air was thick with heat. Yet Kwame noticed something more disturbing than his own pain. A boy, no older than 19, worked with a welding torch. His gloves had holes, his mask was cracked. Sparks danced dangerously close to his bare skin. Kwame flinched, expecting the supervisor to intervene. But the man only barked. Faster! Don't waste time. Kwame clenched his jaw. He wanted to shout, "Do you not see the danger? Do you not care?" But he stayed silent. He was Kojo, the weak new boy. Billionaires don't reveal themselves on day 2. During the mid-morning break, Kwame sat near a group of workers. They talked in low voices, careful not to let the supervisors hear. "My cousin lost his hand last month," one man whispered. "They gave his family a little money. That's all. Then they replaced him the next week." "That's the truth," another sighed. "If you get hurt here, you're finished. Better to die quick than live crippled." Kwame felt his stomach twist. These were men who built his empire, men who risked their bodies every day. And yet their lives were treated as disposable. Later in the afternoon, he saw another scene that made his blood boil. A worker reached for a helmet from the safety rack. The rack was empty. Dozens of helmets, all broken, lay in a heap by the wall. "No new helmets?" the man asked. The supervisor sneered. "Use what you have. Or don't work." Kwame's fists clenched around the steel bar he was carrying. Use what you have? With sparks flying like fireballs? With machines ready to crush bones? By evening, Kwame's body hurt worse than the day before. His muscles screamed, his skin burned. Yet what hurt more was the weight in his chest, the realization that he had never truly known his own factory. When the shift ended, the workers trudged toward the gate like prisoners returning to their cells. Kwame lingered, watching them. They were fathers, sons, brothers. Each one carried exhaustion like a second skin. As he walked out, a man with tired eyes fell into step beside him. His name was Yao, one of the older workers. "You're still here, new boy?" Yao said, almost amused. "Didn't think you'd last 2 days." Kwame forced a smile. "I need the job." Yao studied him for a moment, then nodded. Maybe you're tougher than you look. But listen, don't expect fairness here. Nobody cares about us. Keep your head down. Survive. That's all you can do." The words cut deeper than any steel shard. Survive. That was the dream here, not to live, not to grow, just to survive. As Kwame walked away, he felt the envelope in his pocket, the one with the letter he had written before this journey. He had thought it was just insurance in case things went wrong. But now he realized things were already wrong. And he was just beginning to see how deep the cracks in the system truly ran. Tomorrow would show him more. Much more. On the 3rd day, Kwame began to notice patterns. The supervisors didn't just shout at workers, they squeezed them like lemons. By noon, he saw it with his own eyes. A young man named Daniel had worked overtime, his face blackened with soot. He stood in line to collect his pay from the supervisor. When Daniel opened his envelope, his brows furrowed. "Sir, this is short. I worked 12 hours yesterday." The supervisor smirked, sliding a cigarette into his mouth. "You think you know better than me? Take it or leave it." "But my child is sick. I need." The supervisor grabbed Daniel by the collar. "Talk again and you'll have no job. Do you hear me?" Daniel swallowed hard, nodding. He pocketed the envelope and walked away, eyes hollow. Kwame felt his blood heat. That was his money. His sweat. How many others were being robbed like this? Later, while stacking steel rods, Kwame overheard 2 supervisors whispering in an office corner. "Boss thinks we report all overtime," one chuckled. "But we keep the difference. Easy money." Kwame's hands trembled on the steel rod. The fire in his chest nearly gave him away. "My managers. My trusted men. Stealing from those who bleed for me." When the day ended, Kwame walked with Yao again. The older man seemed to sense his thoughts. "You saw it, didn't you?" Yao said quietly. Kwame nodded. "That's why nobody complains," Yao continued. "Complain and you're fired. Or worse. We all have families. We can't risk it." Kwame wanted to scream, to reveal himself, to promise change. But not yet. He needed to see everything. He needed proof. As he lay on the thin mattress in the workers' quarters that night, his body aching, his soul burning, Kwame whispered to himself, 3 days done. For more to go. But how much more can I take? The siren howled at dawn, dragging the men back to the factory floor. Kwame's body felt heavier than iron, but his mind was sharper now. He had seen the hunger, the stolen wages, the broken helmets. Every detail etched itself into his memory like a scar. That morning, he worked beside Yao, the older man who had taken a quiet interest in him. Yao's hands were rough, his back bent, but he moved with steady precision. "This place eats men alive," Yao muttered. "The trick is to give it just enough of yourself to walk home at night." Kwame wanted to ask how much of Yao was left after 20 years. But before he could speak, a shout rose from across the floor. A young worker, Musa, staggered near the furnace, his legs buckling. Kwame dropped his load and rushed forward. Musa's face was pale, his lips cracked. "I'm fine," the boy gasped. "Just hungry. I gave my food to my brother last night." Kwame helped him to the side, handing him water from his own bottle. Musa's eyes flickered with gratitude before the supervisor's voice thundered. "Back to work. Break is over." Kwame bit his tongue. Rage boiled inside him, but Kojo, the poor drifter, couldn't speak out. Not yet. By noon, an old radio crackled in the corner, broadcasting the news. The announcer's voice cut through the hammering machines. And billionaire industrialist Kwame Adewale remains missing for the 4th day. Police deny rumors of kidnapping, but speculation grows. Kwame froze. He heard it, but worse, so did the men. One worker snatched up the newspaper from the break table. On the front page was Kwame's smiling face. He held it up, laughing. "Look at this rich man. Missing. Maybe he ran away with another man's wife." The workers chuckled. But one of them, a tall man named Kofi, narrowed his eyes. He glanced from the picture to Kwame. Back to the picture. Back to Kwame. "Wait," Kofi said slowly. "Doesn't he look a little like you, Kojo?" The room went still. All eyes turned to him. Kwame's heart pounded like the factory hammers. One wrong word and it was over. Before he could speak, Yao burst out laughing. He slapped Kwame on the back. "Are you blind, Kofi? This boy can barely lift a rod. You think he's a billionaire? If he were rich, would he be eating cold rice with us?" The room erupted in laughter. Kofi shook his head, embarrassed. "Maybe I was seeing things." Kwame forced a nervous laugh, wiping sweat from his brow. "If I had that man's money, trust me, I wouldn't be here." The laughter grew louder, and the suspicion dissolved. But Kwame's pulse didn't slow for the rest of the day. That evening, as the men trudged home, Yao walked beside him. "Careful, new boy. You almost gave yourself away." Kwame exhaled. "Thanks for covering for me." Yao gave him a long, searching look. "You're not like the others. You listen. You care. Who are you really?" Kwame hesitated, then shook his head. "Just another man trying to survive." Yao didn't push further. But from that moment on, his eyes lingered on Kwame with a mixture of suspicion and respect. That night, as the workers slept, Kwame lay awake staring at the ceiling. He thought of Musa fainting from hunger, of Daniel cheated out of his wages, of Yao giving his bones to the factory for the sake of his daughters. And he realized he wasn't just undercover anymore. He was changing. Day 4 had nearly exposed him. But worse than being discovered was the thought that he might leave without fixing what he had seen. Tomorrow he knew everything would shift. The siren wailed at dawn, dragging the men into another day of grinding heat and endless noise. But today felt different. Not to the others, but to Kwame. His body, though battered, was beginning to harden. His muscles ached less. His grip was firmer. The billionaire's soft hands were slowly becoming those of a worker. He arrived early, surprising even Yao. The old man raised an eyebrow. "Look at you. The new boy's got fire now." Kwame only smiled, his lips cracked, his face smeared with soot. Inside, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. Not the purpose of money or deals, but of survival, of proving himself among men who had no choice but to fight every single day. That afternoon, the supervisor barked at the workers to move a stack of oversized steel beams. The rods were heavier than usual, their edges sharp and hot from the sun. Even the strongest men groaned under their weight. "Move faster," the supervisor snapped, "or you'll work through the night." The men muttered under their breath, but nobody dared speak back. They bent their backs and lifted. One after another, they carried the beams across the floor. Sweat poured. Arms shook. When it was Kwame's turn, the men smirked. "Watch this," Kofi whispered. "New boy will drop it before he takes 3 steps." Kwame stepped forward, bent his knees and wrapped his blistered hands around the steel. The weight was crushing, pressing into his shoulders, biting into his palms. His vision blurred. Every instinct screamed to let go. But he gritted his teeth and remembered his father's voice. "If you don't feel the fire, you'll never know what the iron truly costs." With a guttural growl, Kwame lifted the beam. His legs trembled, his spine bent, but he kept moving, one step, then another. The floor went quiet. The men stopped mid-task, watching the weak new boy march forward with a load many of them had refused to touch. Step by step, he reached the drop point and slammed the beam onto the pile with a final roar. His chest heaved, his arms burned, but he was still standing. For the first time, silence filled the factory floor. Then slowly claps. Yao first. Then Musa. Then one by one the others. "Kojo," they shouted. "Kojo! Kojo!" The name echoed like thunder through the factory walls. Kwame lowered his head, hiding the flicker of a smile. He hadn't come here for applause. But in that moment, for the first time, they saw him not as an outsider, not as a weakling, but as one of them. During the break, the men crowded around him. Musa grinned, teeth white against his soot-covered face. "You carried that like a lion, Kojo. Where did you learn that strength?" Kwame chuckled. "Pain teaches you strength." Yao nodded approvingly. "You've earned your place here. You're no longer the new boy." Even Kofi, the sharp-eyed doubter, gave a reluctant smile. "Maybe I was wrong about you." Kwame ate his meal with them for the first time without feeling like a stranger. They passed him water, shared scraps of food, and told stories. They laughed together. The walls of suspicion crumbled. He was still Kojo to them, but now Kojo was a brother. That night in the quarters, the men gathered around a dim lantern. The conversation shifted from laughter to quiet confessions. Musa spoke again, his voice low. "One day I'll leave this place. I'll study. I'll become an engineer. But sometimes I wonder if dreams are only for the rich." The room fell silent. They all knew the truth. Yao broke it with a sigh. "Dreams are for those who survive long enough to chase them." Kwame sat in the corner listening. These men were giving him more than respect, they were giving him their trust, their lives laid bare. And every word felt like a nail in his chest. Because only he knew the truth. He wasn't Kojo, the poor drifter. He was Kwame Adewale, the man who owned the very factory that caged their dreams. As the others drifted to sleep, Kwame stared at the flickering lantern. He thought of the beam he had carried, of the chants of his name, of Musa's whispered dream. Respect was a strange thing. It was earned through sweat, through pain, through shared struggle. But it also came with responsibility. If these men respected him as Kojo, then one day they would have to respect him as Kwame. And when that day came, he vowed, he would not let them down. Tomorrow would test that vow. Tomorrow, the factory itself would put his resolve to the ultimate trial. Day 6 was waiting, and it would bring fire, blood, and a moment that would change everything. The siren screamed again, but today it sounded different. Sharper. Ominous. Kwame felt it in his bones. Something was coming. The factory floor boiled with noise. Sparks showered from welding torches. Gears screeched. Machines groaned like monsters hungry for flesh. The men moved faster than usual. There was a rush order to complete. And when speed became the rule, safety became the casualty. Kwame kept his head down, hauling rods alongside Yao. But his eyes were everywhere, catching the missing gloves, the frayed wires, the broken helmets nobody dared to throw away. It was only a matter of time. Near the furnace, Musa worked with trembling hands. The boy's helmet was cracked, his boots torn. He reached to adjust a steel plate, but the pulley above him shuddered. The rope snapped with a deafening crack. The plate, hundreds of pounds of steel, dropped. "Musa!" someone screamed. Time froze. Kwame didn't think. He threw himself forward, slamming into Musa with all his strength. The steel plate crashed down where the boy had stood, the ground shaking under its weight. Sparks and dust exploded into the air. Silence. Then shouts. Kwame rolled over, coughing, his body aching. Musa stared at him, eyes wide with shock. You saved my life." The floor erupted in chaos. Workers crowded around. Some helped Musa. Others pointed at the broken pulley, shouting at the supervisors. "This equipment is death," one man yelled. "How many more accidents before you fix it?" The supervisors barked orders, their faces pale with fear. "Back to work." Nothing happened here. But the men weren't listening. The accident had lit a fire. Yao's voice rose above the noise. "He could have died today. And tomorrow it could be any of us." Kwame stood silently, chest heaving, his arms trembling. He felt the heat of their anger, the raw truth in their voices. For the first time, the men weren't just tired. They were furious. And they looked at him, Kojo, the new boy who had thrown himself into death's path without hesitation. When the siren finally ended the shift, the workers walked out in silence. No laughter, no chatter, only heavy steps and clenched jaws. Musa walked beside Kwame, still shaken. "If you hadn't pushed me, I would be gone." His eyes glistened. "I owe you my life." Kwame shook his head. "You owe me nothing. You deserve better than this place giving you death for your sweat." Musa frowned, confused by the weight of his words. But he said nothing. That night in the quarters, the men couldn't sleep. They sat in a circle, voices low but sharp. "This factory doesn't care if we live or die," one spat. "They'll cover it up like they always do," another added. Then Yao's voice, deep and steady. "Maybe one day someone will care enough to change it." Kwame looked down at his blistered hands. He knew that someone had to be him. As the lantern flickered, Kwame pulled out the envelope with his letter inside. His fingers lingered on the seal. Tomorrow, he thought. Tomorrow they will know who I am. And nothing will ever be the same. Day 7 was coming. And with it, the revelation that would shock them all. The siren's cry pierced the dawn, but the men carried yesterday's fear on their shoulders. Musa's near death had shaken everyone. Nobody laughed, nobody mocked. The factory felt like a graveyard waiting to be filled. By midday, whispers grew. "How many more before we're buried here?" The workers gathered in the yard during the break, restless, angry. Yao stood, his voice firm. "We cannot keep silent. We deserve better." Kwame felt his heart pound. The time had come. He stepped forward, hands trembling. Slowly, he removed his cracked helmet. The workers gasped. Without soot, his face was unmistakable. "I am not Kojo," he said quietly. "My name is Kwame Adewale. This factory is mine. And I have failed you." The yard erupted. Some cursed. Some stood frozen. Musa stared wide-eyed at the man who had saved him. Kwame raised his hands. "I came here to understand your lives. And now I have felt your pain, your hunger, your fear. No man should risk his life for bread. From today things change. Fair wages, safe equipment, free health care. And 30% of this factory will belong to you, the men who built it." Stunned silence. Then slowly clapping. It spread, rising into cheers until the yard thundered with voices shouting his name. Not Kojo, but Kwame. The next day, newspapers exploded with the story. Billionaire lives as laborer shocks nation with reforms. But one detail spread even faster. A letter, leaked to the press, written before Kwame's 7 days began. "If I die in this factory, let the world know. I died proving that no man's sweat is worth less than mine." And so, the Iron Prince was no longer just a billionaire. He was a brother.